Thank you everyone for being wanting to listen to me, and thank you Babu Krishnamurthy sir and the rest of the IFA Galaxy team to have called me here. It's an interesting opportunity to share our story, and I think through this next 45 minutes or so, I would like to probably try to tell you parallels about, because you've heard my introduction, right? I've spent a little bit of time in finance, little bit of time in electrical engineering, and now for quite a bit of time in rocket building. The parallels I saw in terms of trying to attempt, daring problem statements, I think probably that is what this is going to be about. So let me talk about that. I want to start off with this, very powerful line that I somehow connected with when I was very young. I come from a family of people who are all into physics or engineering in some way. Mom is a physics teacher, aunt is a physics teacher. So I think a lot of dinner table conversations were also about physics or space or something. So maybe that's where my core passion started. And this statement is something that I very strongly connect with. If you've all seen a kid grow up, right, you will know that curiosity is always there, right? I think when we are born, all of us, we are born as explorers. I think it is too fundamentally driven into our into our DNA. But I think, see what happens when you start doing a rocket company, you're only talking about non-disclosure. So yeah, into our DNA, right? But I think probably over the next 20, 25 years, when we go through schooling, when we go through college, when we get to compare ourselves with benchmarks, somehow the exploration part of the story slowly starts to take a hit. Sort of, it happened with me as well, actually, right? So I wanted to do something in aerospace engineering, but people at home were very clear that I should do a degree where I'll get a job. So space and aerospace and all are good, like nice hobby. You can have a telescope and maybe go to the terrace on a Saturday and watch. But beyond that, will it give you food? Will it put food on the table? Not sure. So that is how it started. But these kind of statements, somehow, I think when I was winning prizes in school or something, these books and all were there. So I connected very strongly with it. So one general thing that I tell myself and I tell the team also, and I would probably love for all of you to consider as well as think about that explorer within you. And this need not be only about going to another planet or going to another city or something. Even in what we do day to day, there is some small thing that will give us a joy if we push the limit of something and go to next step. So that is how I tell. That's what I tell myself, and I think it keeps days from not getting extremely boring. So that is what I wanted to start off with, exploration being the essence of the human spirit itself. So in my story, after this part of it, I did a electrical engineering degree in College of Engineering, India, right here in Chennai. Then worked for 2 years in ABB, the heavy electrical engineering company. And everyone in my friend circle was doing something in finance though. So I was like the odd man out in that group. And most of us, when we are in college, that group is your big world, right? If they are doing something and you're not a part of that group, it feels like the world, something you're doing wrong. And to add on to that, my job at ABB was a lot more in, this thing, what to say, installation, commissioning, not design. I used to think I only wanted to do design. That was some 15 years back. So all of this made me explore this new degree called financial engineering. So until then, I was only in India and figured there are schools in the US that offer this for a master's degree. And it felt like still not completely coming away from engineering and still getting into finance, right? So this is actually one thing that's actually not very good, I would say. If you jump, you should jump completely. This one leg here, one leg there usually doesn't work. But that degree was very fascinating for me. And it was very interesting program because it teaches people to apply all these physics models to predict stock markets or to value assets. The only problem is that is driven by physics. So you can probably fit it, if you find a law, you can fit what happens within that phenomenon. and then somewhere in some very extreme case, like inside a black hole or something, things won't work. Stock markets, on the other hand, are a completely different story. You can't mathematically model human behavior, at least not well enough. So when I went to study this program is when that 2008 financial crisis hit. So when you go to the US, that too when you're not from a very well-off background, the first thing is about how do you repay all the money that you're spending on your tuition, right? So that's about getting a job. So I went in June 2008, and then September 2008, Lehman Brothers collapsed, for those of you who remember Lehman. And every other month, roughly, there was one big name not there anymore to apply to. So that is how I experienced New York. So what I saw in New York, all the tall buildings, Wall Street, all those things were nice, but at least my real exposure there completely painted a different picture. So that was one thing that again I learned at that point, right? Always things look a little more interesting from the outside. Once you go there, the reality is completely different. So this stuck to me in those 2-3 years. And anyway, I got a job at AXA. My job was to model their portfolios exposure to interest rates and so on. So that's how my job started 6-7 years in New York, daily, day in and day out, tracking the movement, particularly more in the fixed income side, but a little more on equities also towards the end. But when I was doing all this, I think probably within 1-2 years, I realized my heart is in engineering, particularly in aerospace engineering, so I should just do that. So the next 5 years were about me trying to build the guts to quit that job. And it's actually a very difficult thing because still paying you something reasonably well, and all your other friends, everyone is actually thinking about how to grow in their career when I am actually thinking about how to come out of this branch itself. But I think that thing was there in me. Somehow I felt like if I didn't give this a shot, it will not be the right thing. So quit that job, finally took a leap of faith, applied for a second master's program in aerospace engineering. This was in a state called Illinois, University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. The problem with that place is it's like really remote from where the actual action is. All the action happens in Los Angeles. SpaceX is there, so that's where all the action happens. So converted that program into a remote program, then moved to Los Angeles, did a job to keep my visa status. And that's where I started talking to a lot of people about rockets. And slowly that's where the AGNIKUL story, came together. But the point of telling this background was that I think what I've tried to do in this, 15, 16 years of exploration, I would say, is try to see if I can take something that I learned from one industry, put it into other, and that way, it'll be fresh in terms of offering a solution. And at the same time, you'll also get something done. They call that cross-pollination of ideas. And I've personally seen that it really works well. It gives a lot of, it's a refreshing way to look at things. So on that note, I'll, go walk you through a couple of slides that, I thought I can share. But I think the bigger context is about building AGNIKUL is, to me at least now, about building or solving a hard problem that initially no one will easily agree with, but slowly you can convince people if you're at it for enough amount of time. I think that is basically the story of AGNIKUL, so we'll see what I hear, right? So this was a thing that was always in me, in my mind. Getting to space shouldn't be the hardest part. Today, when you look at a rocket launch, when you look at space, when you look at going somewhere in space, that first 10 kilometers is there, right? Where atmosphere is there. After that, atmosphere gets a little thinner. That first 10 kilometers is the hardest part. Literally, I will connect it with this bigger saying that they have, right? You have to take the first step. After that, everything will happen. Like similarly, space exploration from Earth is about taking that first step. Once you get to space, actually things are a little more, I would say, more understandable, more doable. Uncertainty is lesser. So always believe that, something should be done to get to space easily. It should not be the thing where everyone is like, oh, first step itself we can't take means then what will we do, right? So that is what we have been driven by. And that first step is usually done by rockets. So rockets, many of you may know, but just to clearly, simplify it, they are machines that will take cargo or people from Earth and put it in some point in space, in orbit somewhere. That's all. It's just a machine that goes it's a truck or a cab or whatever you can call it, but instead of connecting 2 points on the surface of our planet, One point is here, one point is some orbital point, right? So it was very clear that rockets are good. And so when we wanted to, build AGNIKUL, or actually wanted to do something to do this, it was like, oh, okay, how do you get from nothing to low Earth orbit? This low Earth orbit is this place where, most of the commercial activity happens. One way to think about it is Chennai to Bangalore, vertically upward, about 400 kilometers, that's all. We are not talking deep space, we are not talking Mars, Moon, though that's all lakhs of kilometers. We are talking literally just 400 kilometers above, which looks again pretty small in the scheme of those distances and all that, but that is also the hardest part. So how do you go from Chennai to there? So the Chennai story actually started for me because, in the US itself, I tried to get into some rocket company, do some things, but their paperwork was a big challenge for a non-American. Basically, if you're not an American citizen or a green card holder, if you want to do something in aerospace, you'll not really be allowed. So the first choice was, are we solving for being in the US or are we solving for rockets? So for me, it was very clear, solving for rockets. So then India became the clear option. Also, I had some plan of coming back at some time. This basically added fuel to that fire, right? Then next thing was to break it down to see, given that that is the problem, what are the various variables in it? To build a rocket, you need money, but why do you need money? You need money because you're building facilities. So the idea was, okay, can we find someone or some group of institutions or something where they already have some facilities and we can build off that? So that is where this university, partnering with university idea came up. So I made a list of about 80, 90 people across the country. I was still in Los Angeles at that time, and tried to reach out to them. These were people who were running labs or facilities or professors, people who had access to facilities or systems that they could actually use, could be used to build rocket systems. And then about 80, 90 people reached out. I think everyone said no actually. I think almost everyone said no except one person who is a professor in IIT Madras. His name is Professor Satya Chakravarti. So he was the one person with whom I was pitching. Usually I'll get advice or this is not right, you already have a good job, you should not look for something else and all. But he was the first person who was like, I pitched 2 ideas, he actually pitched 3 more. So it was like that. So something felt like, okay, this is the right place to be. So I quit my job in LA at that time and came back. And that's where the Chennai story actually started. So we knew that we had some professor with some facilities with which we can get to the first step. And after that, nothing was very clear at that point. This was 2017. So 2017, December is when we started AGNIKUL basically. And from that time, this tagline has been something that we have tried to be as honest as possible to, right? Launching anywhere, anytime, affordably. So by the way, you saw the video. So this is actually the rocket crossing the most stressful point of the flight. They call that the max Q, for those of you who are curious about it. If you're going very fast, but there is no atmosphere, it's okay. Nothing is there to stop you. If you're going very slow, but there is a lot of dense air, on the surface of the planet, that's also okay. Problem comes when you're going very fast and there is still meaningful amount of air. The rocket, it's sort of like, even if it's a swimming pool or something, if you jump from a very, tall place, you may get hurt, right? Because at that velocity, it will offer enough resistance. Similarly, when you're going that fast in a rocket, atmosphere is enough to break you up. Simply nothing, no other loads are required. You go in the wrong direction to the velocity, if the wind is flowing in another direction, just that can break up the rocket. So the phase where the rocket faces the most amount of, I would say, stress is this place called max Q. So this is a photo of the rocket crossing max Q, and this is the biggest relief for us. It's like, okay, if this is done, then basically the technology works. So anyway, coming back to this, so the launching anywhere part starts from that, really simplifying it should be about this. So what do we build? Just to give you context of that before getting into more details. Everyone has heard about SpaceX today, so I'm comparing it with SpaceX. So SpaceX also builds rockets. And if you look at some key metrics here, you could see the carrying capacity. It's a vehicle, right? Rocket is simply a vehicle. So Falcon 9, which is the most flying rocket in the world today, it carries 20,000 kgs. That's the carrying capacity. It's almost like a train that goes to orbit. We are actually building on the other extreme, carrying capacity of 300 kgs or so. But what are we trying to flip? We are trying to flip the amount of waiting time, flexibility, and so on. It's like a train versus there is a very well-oiled train that works, but there are no cabs, no autos to space. So that is basically what we're trying to build. So that problem statement was very clear when we look at, pictures like this, right? It may look like a lot of names, but in this picture here, if you see on the left, you'll see a lot of satellite companies. And on the other side, you see a lot of rocket companies. And this axis here, this x-axis is the size of the satellite. So quick way to understand this picture is all the satellites are small, all the rockets are big. So that is a problem today. Before it was not the case. Before rockets were, it was a very first principles approach in the 60s and 70s. Someone decided they had to put a satellite in space, say for communication or taking photos or something. That ended up becoming a huge system. Then someone figured, for that bigger system, you have to build a big rocket. And then that's how things were happening. Then suddenly electronics started to shrink. We saw all our devices get smaller. The last 20 years story, right? We all know that part. Satellites also embraced that. Satellites also became small. But rockets still were stuck in the past. So we had this, you are almost like you're not able to change rockets quickly, but satellites have completely changed. So that is what basically I'm showing here. It's because all of you have this finance background, also wanted to touch upon the market. It's actually interesting. You can actually make money out of building rockets and launching them. This is one of the things that we struggled with early on to convince people. Everyone accepts it's nice and challenging. Everyone accepts it's cool as a hobby. But again, is it like a business? Can you really spend something and make more than that by actually doing something? That's very... that was not obvious, but now it is. It's a lot of money is there to be made in this. So that's basically the problem that we have today. And if you think about what really we wanted to solve for, right? Any transportation system, if you think of, let's say, a Uber that we take, Ola that we take or something, there are only 3 parameters that matter, right? How much you pay, how fast it will come to you, and whether it will really come to your doorstep or the driver will say, "Abdi anga right to you." Just take that ride alone and comes or something. And it is worse with, these buses sometimes, right? If they don't have enough people, they won't even leave. They will just wait for more and more people. I don't know if you have seen some of those situations. And similarly, the drop-off point also, it won't be exactly where you want. Drop you off somewhere where most of them want. In fact, every bus stop is like that, right? It's a commonly agreed upon point where from there you have to figure out your way to home. So that's what happens in space too. A rocket today, when it is taking a lot of satellites, in this image here you can see it's actually inside the nose cone of a Falcon 9 rocket. All these solar panel type things that you can see there. These are all actually satellites. They're all multiple satellites. They all want to go to different places. No rockets are flying, so they just got into this guy. It's like a bus is taking all of them. And obviously the bus will leave them at the bus stop. It won't leave them at their home. The last mile delivery, that's the phrase. That is still not there in space. So those kind of problems are there. So we were very clear that if you're really making transportation simple, then the most fundamental variables are about these things only. Price, time, pickup, drop off. That's all. It could be the technology that is needed to get there is a lot. So that is still complex, but the fundamental variables are still always the same 3-4 things only. So that is what we set out to solve. We wanted to make sure our rockets will actually not have any of these problems itself. So this was there in the mind. So then comes this question of, okay, now all these ideas are there, right? But then you do, one thing I have realized in an area, if you're very interested in, you get so carried away about that, say the technology or that area, that you forget the utility aspect completely. I don't know if you've come across this. I've seen a lot of people also do that. We get lost in that train of thought or in that direction without knowing what is the whole point. Why are we doing all of these things, right? The why question. So that's why this was very important for us. Conceiving a useful rocket. Is the rocket useful? Yes, it is. It's nice to build a rocket. Very lucky to have the opportunity actually. But will there be any meaningful value addition from that? So that was actually not at all easy to solve for, right? So when we did this usual market survey, one thing that we realized is a lot of people were building small rockets, or at least they're trying. This was like 2017. People are all trying, because the problem I told you is not very hard to watch if you're in the sector. Maybe because you're not in the sector, you won't be aware. But imagine someone who's following this day in and day out. For them, they'll know very clearly satellites are, small, rockets are big, right? It's not a hard thing to notice. So a lot of people wanted to do something, but many of them tried to do this, in my understanding, like, take something and shrink it, that's all. Big rocket means, okay, that's a big rocket, no, make a small rocket. The engineering would work. To be very honest, physics doesn't care, big or small, if the numbers add up, it will work. Then comes the question of cost-wise, will it work, right? Does it even make sense to actually simply think of a big rocket, a small rocket as a shrunken version of a big rocket? So that sort of crude approximation or the crude simplification was not okay. And in hindsight, it looks very obvious, but trust me, when we were going through this, it was not at all clear. Because we still don't know what is useful. There is a guy who is flying every other day. SpaceX is, I think, launching every 2 days now. What are we going to do to make sense? Yeah, we like drilling rockets, but what is the point? So that is one thing that, was in our mind. And then we had to distill that confusion into simple questions. So this is something that, again, it was in the story of AGNIKUL, but I think generally also I try to use this whenever I face dilemmas at work. The mess is one thing, the confusion is one thing, but can we distill it into 2 or 3 questions? Ideally less than 3 questions, right? So these were the questions that we had, right? What can a small rocket do that a large rocket cannot do? We should hit hard on that instead of simply building the same thing again or shrinking stuff. That is one thing. And then comes the specification part, the being specific part, right? What can our rocket do that no other rocket do? So one is about the category itself. What can this category do better than the other category? Then what can AGNIKUL do that's better than anyone else in that category? And then, of course, how can this not be just a rich person's hobby? It should not be like, okay, you give me 500 crores, then we will talk about building a business. No, we didn't have that kind of money. So my other co-founder Moin and I, we put in our saving of about, I think, somewhere 50 lakhs and we started. That's all that was there at that time. So how do you build rockets or start the journey of building rockets with very less amount of money? So that was also said. This is basically the questions that came out of that confusion for us. And that resulted in the technology. So one thing that I strongly, I'm actually, feeling that, okay, we did one thing right in the early part, right? We may have done a lot of other mistakes, but the one good thing that we did is, till today, the core problem statement is not changed at all. What we are building, every technology, and there's a lot of jargon. If you're not in the sector, it's easy to overwhelm all of you by putting some jargon here and there. But I think the core point of that is those technologies that we chose to solve for, it came from those questions. So that, I think, is something, today it looks like, thank God we did that. At that time, it was not that clear, right? So I'm not saying we had that foresight and all. I'm just saying that is something, if I look back, one thing I feel good about in our journey is luck or, by chance, whatever it is, the problem statements are very, very clear. What is going to do? What is this rocket going to do? And that is what gave rise to the technology we have to solve for. So there are multiple things, right? So if you're taking a lot of satellites, then you should not be forcing that on that. Like the bus statement I told you, right? If the bus is not full, you can't be like, I won't fly the rocket. So ride sharing or getting people together should be optional. Similarly, making rocket itself should be not that complex. We realized to make a rocket engine in the industry, it was like 16 weeks, 20 weeks, then qualifying it is another 6 weeks. We wanted to bring that down to a few hours. So that's where this whole concept of 3D printing and all of those things came in. And then the mobile launchpad. This is again the part about what can a small rocket do that a large rocket can never do. Right? You can easily move it around. So are we really going hard behind that variable, right? That this no big rocket can do, only we can do. How do you optimize it to the best? Because otherwise it becomes like just you're like, say for example, you're fighting SpaceX or any other larger rocket company just on pricing, because that's one usual angle. India means it is cheap. I don't know, at least in space tech it doesn't work that way. But I think it's also like that pricing war is nothing. It's just a lot of bloodshed. No real value comes from that directly. Because as things become better here also pricing will go up, right? So the point is not about can we build the cheapest rocket in the world, but will technologies itself be available to make it inexpensive? Cost is important, but how to solve for cost, just not counting on India. So the mobile launchpad part came from there. SpaceX is such a, wonderful, it's been an inspiration for me, right? And I think one thing that even they can't do that I think we have done is keep the entire launchpad mobile. And that's not a comment on their technological capability. It's just a question of it's too big, that's all. Just physically, that's not possible for them. It's possible for us. How hard are we solving for them? And it actually has pricing implications as well. So those are the technologies. So our mobile launchpad, our 3D printed engines, our ability to shrink a rocket or scale a rocket and helps make ride-sharing option, all of this comes from those questions. And so the result of all that is this. This is the Agniban, the commercial vehicle that we are building right now. Hopefully a launch in the next 8 months or so, August, September. It'll be a very interesting launch because we are also trying out a few things that has never been tried out in India before. So I consider myself very lucky to have the opportunity to do all that. But it'll be something that is coming out from all this. So this part is clear. So this is just the founder story, right? So yeah, me and my co-founder Moin, professor, and professor took us to a retired ISRO scientist who's in Chennai. His name is R.V. Perumal sir. So all of that is that level brainstorming. So on paper, PPT, all that is clear, but then how does it translate to reality with people? So this hiring problem is one very interesting problem at least in our industry, I think in the rocket industry. I don't know if probably it'll apply to other industries in India, but I figured that itself is a problem statement to solve for. And as a founder or as even a manager building a team, that's what I tell people who, in my teams also when they're hiring. So let me just walk you through what I thought I solve for, right? It's always solving for that attitude part of it. So one of our mentors very early on told that don't solve for this technology and anyway no one knows how to build those kind of rockets. You might as well find people who are humble enough to learn to build those things. So concentrating on culture, concentrating on people, even if the core, like they may not be the highest IQ person in the pool that we have interviewed, but they are the people who are the easiest to work with in terms of being humble. Not easiest because they listen to whatever we are saying. That's not what I'm saying. So to find those sweet spots took us some time and to look for a few traits. So we tried to make this process a little more scientific. I mean, hiring is one messy process according to me. I've still not figured what is the best way to do it. But let me tell you what I have learned, what to look for, what people, right? So we started off with this. So I was in College of Engineering, India, right? In 2006 when I graduated, Google was the hottest company to apply for, okay? And they had this really interesting tagline for their placements. In the pre-placement talk, they came and said only one thing, because a lot of questions were about what will Google look for, what should I do to get into Google? And by the way, I didn't get placed in Google, that's another story. But they went with this tagline of, if you're really, really good at anything, you have a place at Google. I made it AGNIKUL here. It's okay to copy if it's a really core emotion that sticks with us, right? But that is something that I felt defines how we should look at hiring. And also the industry also demands that rocket has propulsion, it has electronics, it has software, it has operations. No one knows how to construct a solid, strong business model for a rocket company in the country, right? I have one because we have to, but we'll see Excel is one thing, but reality is another thing. That too in a place, see in US maybe it's slightly easier because SpaceX has done it. So there is a reference point. In India, the engineering can maybe be, applied, but not how actual work happens. So we need people who are interested in that angle as well, in finance, in operations, in negotiations with vendors. It's a huge problem statement in terms of multiple aspects to it. So we started off with this. The core statement was, okay, I mean, I could say we just went with what Google said when I was in College of Engineering India, but I think we also actually agree with that. Then came the question of asking the people itself, first of all, what do they need, right? Or what does a person need and what do leaders in our teams need? So this, I think, is a little cross-functional, I would say. It actually is possible to apply this across multiple functions, even within engineering and outside of engineering also. So hopefully this part will be a little more directly relevant. So he tried to solve for this as much as possible, because if this alone somehow, somewhere you get it, everything else becomes easy. Like literally, it is sort of like this, like when we used to play games and all that, there'll be one cheat code or something. If you put that, everything becomes easy, right? Whatever happens in the video game, you will never be killed. Similarly, if you have this, if you see this in people, That's it. Everything else becomes a second. The problem is a lot of distraction is there in keeping this going. So you may find a person who is passionate, but that is a function of time. As of today, passion is high. 2 months later, grass on the other side is greener. So that function of time is a variable, which is, I'll talk about that next, but this is something that we try to solve for, because with this, everything else I'm talking for will actually be automatically addressed. Then comes the function of time, persistence. So I don't know if you have had to go through this problem statement in your journeys, but it is very difficult to come up with an interview question to check for persistence. I still don't know the best question to ask, okay? Because it's well defined in terms of time, right? How do you check if you're dealing with people who are persistent? So that was hard for us. I think we have a few tricks that we use when, anyway, our interview process takes 14 hours, so that itself gives a taste of persistence. But yeah, a lot more work even for me to do here. But I'm just sharing that this is something we look for, because passion and persistence is basically the story's over. Then in terms of this, when we look for people who can hire. This is something that I find somehow people overcomplicate how to do this, right? Because when I ask this, or when I try to evaluate if someone can run a team, my first question to the person is, have they played cricket before coming to, job interviews? Most of them have, right? Football, cricket, something. So like, how do you hire for your team there? And the answer could be anything. One guy was simply waiting there. I was short of one person. I said, come join the team. Starting from that to, telling, okay, I know, I saw that guy, the stroke, no, that itself, I knew how he was holding the bat. That itself, I could make the judgment. The way the person answers that question, I know at least that he or she is actually trying to look for evaluating people. And I think we need a little bit of that as we grow. And obviously, it is something that is learned over a period of time. I wouldn't say even I know what exactly is needed for AGNIKUL, for example. But it's an acquired skill. But I think that inclination should be there, which I think, at least in an engineering front, if I find a really good propulsion engineer, I will very likely not have that person have this. They are very happy sitting in front of a computer and solving problems. They are not at all like evaluating how a person will be able to take off their load, how they can do it, bigger things together. But that's something that I try to look for. So I just wanted to share that. This one, maybe for you all, it must be an easier story. In engineering context, this is a super hard part. Again, basic business sense. First time when I asked this question, what does a business mean or something, I get all these super complex answers. So then I'll ask, have you tried to sell something at least, right? And like the sales question, typical questions, how will you sell a pen? All that is one thing, but you spend some 5 rupees and you made something, have you sold it for 10 rupees to anyone? But somehow that is still missing in people. I think that basic business sense is, if people have that, in whatever area they are in, even they could be a core R&D engineer, or it could be a total sales role, I think this is something to look for. And this part, so every time I ask this question about luck to people, and I don't know if it's usually asked about in interviews, but at least I ask. And I get a lot of answers. The cliched answers, I make my own luck. That shows one attitude. From there to other things like, yeah, anyway, luck is there, what will I do? So I heard a lot of things, right? And so one person actually, so we have this team called astrodynamics. Basically, these are the guys who actually plot how a rocket should go to orbit. There is a trajectory, from Earth. How do you go to an orbit? It's basically an optimization problem. You have to spend the least amount of fuel and get there for the highest mass you can take. Okay, so they are the job is very mathematical optimization. That's what they do it on day-on basis. So one guy started drawing a chart and explaining luck to me. So I took inspiration from that, and then I started doing. He actually plotted something like this. So it's not completely my idea, but I strongly resonate with it. So he told me something of this thing like, for the same amount of input, output will be lesser sometimes, more sometimes. That is what is luck. That was his literal definition. I couldn't hire him. His salary ask was too high, to be honest. But I generally try to work with people, because if they know that there is some uncertainty and they should be prepared, because the outcome could be different at different times, I think that helps. So we look for people like that. We also tell our leaders to be like that because there is this cross-pollination I was telling you about. No? So I like writing a lot, screenwriting particularly. So one of my favorite writers in the Hollywood industry is this writer by name Aaron Sorkin. Okay, so I generally watch a lot of, because I like the process of how people write. So I listen to a lot of those kind of interviews, and he casually mentioned this statement. For every 100 pages of bad writing, there is 1 page of good writing. He just casually mentioned it as if it's like no big deal, okay? So that again stuck. So that is the level of persistence it is taking for someone who's so accomplished. He has gotten 2 Academy Awards, if I'm not mistaken. So that stuck with me. So I like people who are prepared, who are able to understand that sometimes things don't work and you have to be with the problem over and over, and there is something that will click at some point. So that notion of luck, whether they believe in luck or not, but there is something outside of you that will have to align. Until then, you'll have to be prepared. That gives you a little bit of, I think, maybe you could say being humble, and that helps, particularly with rockets. So that is there. Then the question is about what to develop within ourselves, right? So here, one thing that I have learned, patience. And actually, I used to be now also I'm an impatient person only. But in the scheme of things, this is an extremely difficult skill to look for in younger people particularly. And things don't work, right? As I was just telling you, 100 bad days to 1 good day, 100 bad pages of writing for 1 good writing, 100 engine tests for 1 successful qualification. So that patience part of it, if you're looking for instant gratification, that doesn't work. So I think that is one thing I tell myself, still a long way to go to be a more patient person, but this is something that I think generally is a good attribute to build. And I ask people also how to build it, right? Because it's a skill. So then you should be able to do something to build patience. So what do you do to build patience is a question. So we had this month or so, I think, sometime 2022 or something, right after COVID, where we said, so we offer free lunch for people who work with us. So we said, if you're hungry, don't go and eat then. Wait for 15 minutes and go. At least you will know that you're actually taking your time, and then they will actually write in a paper how long they waited before they went and had lunch. There's some way of training your brain to say, just because you want something doesn't mean immediately you should go for it. So all these tricks is what I used to get people to be a little more patient, but yeah, again, work in progress here as well. Then the question of integrity. This is something we take very seriously. I think that fundamental, and I've seen this over and over in people. Some people have that innately in them, and no amount of rules or lack of rules will shake them from it. And some people somehow are not exactly in that direction. And if that is not there, no amount of rules, there is always a loophole. There's always something you can do to make it slightly questionable, right? And I try to stay away from that, from people like that as well. But this is something I also try to look for, but it's very hard to come up in a very short process. And then this other part of storytelling. So first of all, this again, storytelling, how to be narrating something. These things are very, close to me generally. I like the process of storytelling. And I don't know, maybe that is why I am the one who is pitching most to the investors whenever I am the one who does the fundraise for AGNIKUL mostly, right? So I think I try to look for this in terms of how to simplify that usual questions people ask, right? Can you explain something super complicated to a 10-year-old or something? So I think that is something that we also ask people to do. Intentionally ask a propulsion person to come over to a person, say in operations, who has not done anything, they won't even know what it means to understand propulsion. And we'll take some very complex topic, say some jargon I'll use. ISP, there is something called ISP, specific impulse. Explain specific impulse to this guy. So if this guy is not able to explain it to this person, then that person, both of them have not understood it, is how I try to explain it. Again, this is one way in which we can make these kind of attributes stick. And ability to take the highs and lows, and the lows, I put all the O's there because the lows are really crushing, right? Things will be bad. And how is our temperament through that process? People, are they able to manage their emotions within a narrow band? I think that is something that helps. At least the most successful people in my team have all been people who are like generally, okay, fine, flies, that is also great, we'll clap and do the next launch. Oh, it didn't fly. There was a problem with the engine. Okay, fine. We'll come and go fix it. Ellame, it's okay, fine. Everything is like, yeah, it's fine. It'll work out. If that general Zen state is there, it helps. And the harder the problem, the more it helps. Because otherwise, I think it's draining, right? Like, if you see this high and then you see that low and again you see this high and you keep seeing this every other day, beyond a certain point, it's very difficult to process that level of emotion, and the remaining rational decision making gets affected. Just because I'm happy, I'll say okay to something. Just because I'm I don't know, depressed, say sad or not happy or frustrated, I will not say okay to something. So those kind of decisions you should try to avoid. So always I try to look for people who are somehow balanced. Again, this comes a lot from their upbringing as well, I guess. But also it's something that I tell myself, how can I maintain my temperament within a very tight band so that it's not like you're jumping with joy or also, crying in a bathroom or something. And finally, this connects back to the first thing I spoke about, which is passion. So something should be there to look forward to in terms of fun. There should be some value to it. And again, I think this is it's a choice. We can choose to have fun in even the most simplest of things. It's not like only when a rocket lifts off, we should have fun, or when you saw all those engine tests or whatever in the video. Yeah, that is more obvious reasons to have fun, but then I think there are other simpler victories. So one of the things that I try to do is to help the team find those moments. And also for myself, I try to do that, because I think otherwise this point of trying to do something big or trying to challenge the status quo, all of those things become, it's nice when you start, right? The question is again, how consistent are we over a period of time? And so all of these things come into that part, I think. And then this part. So, which is the part actually I completely missed when we started AGNIKUL. So, of course, I knew something about rockets. We got people, retired ISRO people to help us. We got professors. We got a lot of interesting people as well. But this is more of founder's job, right? And in our case, as I told you, it's my job. So I didn't know what this took. And without this, all the other teams, everything is like, yeah, okay, that is there. But then what will they do without the money? So this entire strategy was needed to come up with this. So in a broader context, I would like to think of it like, it doesn't seem like the most obvious thing. It could be anything in any problem, but it is actually the defining thing that keeps things going. So that is what I learned from this part of the story, right? So I think for us, it was literally about how do we raise money in a country where no one has raised money for building rockets before. How do you tell it to a community of people who don't understand the product? I mean, yeah, it flies, but beyond that, like, how do you explain this to someone? It's a hard challenge, and we can't expect a person from an investing background to understand the technology and the marvel of it and all that is there. But then what will give them the confidence, right? So I think that we took a lot of time. It took a bit of first principles. And we have raised some money so far, so I think at least so far we have cracked it to some level. $45 million we have raised so far, right? But I think the problem there, or the challenge there to solve for, was how do you break it down into milestones and keep telling people that there is progress in progress. Not only to show people, but also to actually go carry this along. So on a broader context, I think this is about, again, something where you're going to have an audience which is not fully accepting what you're going to tell them, and yet it's your duty to convince them. I see this a lot in other aspects of AGNIKUL also, but this is a very stark example. So coming up with milestones, coming up with things where they'll build confidence, I think that was something that was needed. And also counting a lot on the core problem solution, right? Like, one thing is you need to raise money. The other thing is, can we get away without raising money, at least in certain aspects of it? So that's where the technology will help. If you do a really interesting technology-driven cost reduction, then it's easier to sustain that. So that's what this whole, trying to use technology, trying to use other places where, why do you need the cash? If someone is giving you a lab, can you use that lab itself directly, and so on. So that's the story. So if we have done all these things, we can then, I think, start thinking about, for us, from an AGNIKUL standpoint, it's about getting from Chennai to next anywhere in the universe. So we've gotten somewhere, now we have to go to anywhere else. So working on a lot of interesting things here in terms of recovery. You may all have seen SpaceX do this thing where they're catching a part of their rocket with like what they call, now they're calling it chopsticks, whatever. There's a tower catching it. We will do a version of it, not like catch it with chopsticks. We have other ways of extending the life of the rocket and launching from outside the country as well and so on. So for us, I've tried the best to make sure that there is always something to look forward to, even at a granular level. Even at a big level, there are always, it's very interesting and easy to say there are a lot of problem statements to solve. But I think giving a clear goal to the team also about these 17 things have to be done. And with that, you have a very clear path ahead towards something that no one has ever done. So I think that is something that we are trying to work on. So that is AGNIKUL's story, and broader context, that's how I look at it. So yeah, I think very lucky. I'm ending with this slide basically. Getting the government support, and there's a story behind this with which I'll stop, right? When we started AGNIKUL, and particularly when I was pitching for AGNIKUL fundraise, the first question I used to get in 2017, 2018 was, will the government allow this? Is it legal to launch a rocket privately in the country? And to be very honest, the answer was not very clear because there were no laws around it, right? And still we went ahead with, we had this notion that, okay, even if they don't allow us to launch, at least we'll make the technology and sell it to ISRO. Still there is money coming in, there is a business model, we can get ahead with it. And then, when this got actually, live or validated, 2020, when everyone was sitting at home, things were looking very dark for all of us. The Atmanirbhar initiatives were announced, right? And I don't know if you remember, the finance minister was going, it was like sometime in May 2020, the finance minister was going through all the announcements under Atmanirbhar initiative. It was the broadcast on YouTube, as I was seeing, was almost like a presentation. You were seeing the finance minister talking, and then there was half the screen for all the initiatives that were there under a sector. So sector by sector, we were seeing things. First came something like agriculture, automobile, electric vehicles, all this. And out of the blue, space was there. That completely, threw all of us off guard. It was a good thing. They clearly said privatization is going to come to space technology in the country because that's how we can get a bigger share of the global business. Because in space tech, India is a leader. There is absolutely no doubt about it. And yet we hold very little market share because of, the policy at that time was not very clear. So from there it started, and literally after that YouTube streaming was over, I went and wrote a mail to Chairman ISRO. At that time it was Dr. Sivan, saying, I heard this initiative is coming, can I get permission to launch? Literally that day itself we wrote. The best part, in 2 to 3 days time, we got a reply asking for a meeting as well. So from there the journey actually became also about the policy environment in the country also helping us and so on. So it was validation for the previous thing that, okay, things may be bad for a prolonged period of time, but someday something will open up. I could call it in this particular thing, because I had not that much of a control on this, I would call it the luck factor, right? It happened, and one good thing is we had done 3 years of work before that. 2017 to 2020, we had done all that work. The engine was ready. Already investors knew about it. Business model was there. So when the policy came, we were able to act very quickly. We were able to directly ask for permission to launch. So that, I'm just connecting the story back with what I said about the luck part as well. So that's where we are. I think lot more to do, and I think a lot more. Every day I go to work, there's so much I learn that I don't know much. That's what I know, not only the technology part and a lot of other things. So I think as all of you, as you go through your day-to-day lives, or if you're looking at something difficult and hard, keep that in mind as well. At least that's what helps me keep going at it every day, day after day, without getting bogged down with all the obstacles we face. Thank you very much for the opportunity. I hope.
Thank you.